Urho Kekkonen served as Finland's longest-serving president from March 1956 officially to January 1982, although he was unable to govern Finland because of arteriosclerosis since September 1981. He was born in the rural town of Pielavesi in northern Savo, eastern Finland, in September 1900. He died in Helsinki, the Finnish capital, in August 1986. He served as a member of the Finnish Parliament from 1936 to 1956, as a member of the Agrarian Union, the predecessor of today's Finnish Centre Party. He also served as the Finnish Prime Minister from 1950 to 1953 and from 1954 to 1956 before being elected Finland's longest-serving and eighth president. He continued the active neutrality policy of his predecessor, President Juho Kusti Paasikivi, a doctrine which came to be known as the Paasikivi-Kekkonen line. Under it, Finland retained its independence while being able to trade with both NATO members and those of the Warsaw Pact. And President Kekkonen and other top Finnish politicians never publicly criticized the Soviet Union's foreign policy or domestic policy actions. They received any criticism for their private discussions with the Soviet authorities. He also wrote me letters, often critical letters, to some Finnish politicians and journalists who dared to openly oppose the Soviet Union and to oppose his conciliatory foreign policy towards the Soviet Union. He graduated from the Lyceum or Secondary School of Kajaani in the historical province of Kainuu in northeastern Finland in 1918. He then moved to Helsinki in 1921 to study law. And while studying law at the University of Helsinki, he worked for the security policy searching central police or etsivä keskuspoliisi from 1921 to 1927. He married Miss Sylvi Uino in 1926. She was working as a typist at the police station where he was working. They had two sons, twin sons, Matti and Taneli, both born in 1928. Matti is still alive. Taneli committed suicide in 1985. In 1927, he became a lawyer and worked for the Association of Rural Municipalities until 1932. He became a Doctor of Laws in 1936. In the 1920s, he also practiced high jump and 100-meter dash. A nationalist at heart, Kekkonen's ideological roots lay in the student politics of newly independent Finland and in the radicalism of the right wing. He joined the Academic Karelia Society, an organization favoring Finland's annexation of Eastern Karelia, but resigned from it in 1932 along with over 100 other moderate members because of the organization's support for the 1932 far-right Mäntsälä Rebellion. According to a long-time late agrarian and centrist politician, Mr. Johannes Virolainen, some Finnish right-wingers began to hate and mock Kekkonen for that decision and to cast him as a power-hungry opportunist. He served as Justice Minister from 1936 to 1937 and as Interior Minister from 1937 to 1939. He was out of the government until the autumn of 1944, serving as the director of the Karelian Evacuees Welfare Center and as the Ministry of Finance's Commissioner for Coordination. Then he served again as Minister of Justice until 1946 and had to deal with the so-called war responsibility trials, whereby the Soviet-controlled Control Commission forced Finland to sentence 8 top wartime politicians to prison terms ranging from 2 to 10 years. He served as Deputy Speaker of Parliament from 1946 to 1947 and as the official Speaker from 1948 to 1950. He first ran for President in 1950 but finished a distant third, while the Conservative President Paasikivi was re-elected. He then won the 1956 presidential election with the narrowest of margins by 2 votes. The shift of any 1 vote would have tied the result and forced the electors to choose the president by casting a lot. During his 25 to 26-year presidency, the center-right National Coalition Party was kept in opposition for 20 years, despite some good election performances, while his own party, the Centre Party, was in government for almost all the time. Also, the centrist and populist Rural Party was kept in the opposition, as was the small Finnish Christian League. Mainly the agrarians and later the centrists, Social Democrats and Swedish People's Party were in government regularly, and then the People's Democrats and Communists were in government quite often from 1966. Also the Liberals, who still were in the Finnish parliament, quite often were in the government. Kekkonen was accused by his critics, for example, of power hungriness, opportunism, using his good Finnish-Soviet relations as a weapon in domestic policy, for excessive drinking, fist-fighting and womanizing. The excessive drinking and womanizing charges were partly correct, because at times in evening parties with his friends Kekkonen got drunk, and he had at least 2 long-time mistresses. During the note crisis in October and November 1961, Kekkonen was able to convince the Soviet leaders, starting from General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, Mr. Nikita Khrushchev, that Finland, under his presidency, would continue to have friendly and confidential relations with the Soviet Union. The Soviet government's note contained inaccurate information claiming that militarism and neo-Nazism were increasing in West Germany so much that Finland and the Soviet Union would have to consult each other on military aid in case of a possible German invasion. He was re-elected by about 2/3 of the electors in 1962 and 1968. Then in 1973, the Finnish parliament re-elected him through an exceptional law by a 5/6 majority in order to ensure that Finland would get a favorable free trade deal with the European Economic Community, the predecessor of today's European Union. In 1978, he was last elected president, winning over 5/6 of the electoral votes. He had begun to suffer gradually from failing health since the spring of 1970, when he suffered a mild heart attack, and since the autumn of 1972, when he suffered his first brief memory lapse. That was the first sign of the onset of his basic illness, slowly but surely advancing arteriosclerosis. He also suffered from failing eyesight since 1977 and from a failing sense of balance since 1976, among other illnesses. His health broke down in early September 1981, and he went on a sick leave that changed into a resignation announcement in late October 1981. As a result of Kekkonen's rather authoritarian style of government, the Finnish president's powers have been cut a lot. He can no longer dismiss the government or an individual minister unless the parliament passes a vote of no confidence against the government or the minister, unless the government or the minister can asks to be dismissed, or in the case of an individual minister, unless the prime minister recommends that he or she be dismissed. Also, the president can no longer dissolve parliament and call early elections unless the prime minister advises him or her to do so and gives some reason for so doing. The president's appointment powers have been cut. He or she can no longer block legislative proposals of the government from the parliament, and his or her veto power has also been weakened, among other changes.